The case of a missing pregnant woman found dead in the woods of northern Michigan with her baby nowhere to be found has taken another sick and twisted turn. After the victim's sister and fiance were arrested last week, her biological mother and stepfather are behind bars, charged with torture and murder.
This is, frankly, evil personified.
The courtroom was rocked as prosecutors talked about the couple allegedly cutting the baby from Rebecca Park's womb, leading to her death. We are digging into the latest details on the family's criminal past and alleged plan to hurt Rebecca. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. By the way, as you're watching this, okay, if you're in the content creation game, if you're putting things up on social media, have you ever wondered how we're able to share so many clips from all of these stories so quickly? Here's a secret, Opus Clip, okay? This is an all-in-one AI editor that makes it so easy to cut, create, and upload videos across any platform. Through AI, Opus Clip generates B-roll, it reframes footage, and it even cleans up audio. It is so easy. You just visit opus.pro/sidebar, you sign up, you upload, and in minutes you will have perfectly edited clips ready to go for TikTok, Shorts, Reels. Opus Clip is your one-stop shop, and having a tool like Opus Clip means that our producers can get you viral courtroom updates instantly. This is the most powerful tool there is to help you share ideas and edit like a pro. So go to opus.pro/sidebar to create your videos today, and for this month you can get 65% off of an annual plan. When we first told you about the discovery of 22-year-old Rebecca Park's body in a Michigan National Forest earlier this week, we were all waiting for the other shoe to drop. Right? Who was behind the killing of this young woman? She was due to give birth at any time. Where was the baby? Were the arrests of her sister, her fiance, were they connected to her disappearance in any way, her death? Was there something else at play? These were the questions we were asking. But I'll tell you what, right now, we are getting answers, potential answers, and they are dark, they are disturbing. I wish they weren't true. These are allegations at this point. But if true, it is a level of twisted that it's hard to imagine. Okay? These moments leading up to Rebecca's demise. And now the question is, my gosh, how many of her own family members are potentially involved here? And I want to be clear about what this means and what it doesn't. So according to social media posts from family and friends, Rebecca spent time in the foster system growing up, and she was eventually adopted by a woman named Stephanie Park. She reportedly had very little contact with her biological mother, a woman named Cortney Bartholomew. That is until recently. You see, Rebecca was last seen in the Boone Township and Cadillac areas. These are rural parts of the state, about 200 miles northwest of Detroit on November 3rd. And according to Wexford County prosecutors, Cortney and her husband, Brad Bartholomew, so her stepdad, allegedly lured Rebecca to their home. And the events that investigators say followed are the reason they are now facing a laundry list of felony charges. That's the update. According to the Detroit Free Press, Cortney and Brad each face charges of first-degree premeditated murder, felony murder, torture in a place of confinement, conspiracy to commit torture, assault of a pregnant woman with the intention to cause miscarriage or stillbirth, conspiracy to commit that assault, unlawful imprisonment, and moving a dead body. These are very specific charges, and they tell pieces of the story, right? And I should also mention that that last count, the moving the dead body, is a misdemeanor. Now, they could face life in prison if they're convicted here, according to Cadillac News. To give you an idea about what we're talking about, according to the Michigan Department of Attorney General's press release, it is alleged that this mother and this stepfather lured Park to their home and, quote, allegedly tortured Park in an attempt to remove the unborn infant, resulting in the death of both. I'm going to stop right there, because as we get into the charges, the outcomes, as we try to understand more about what may have happened to Rebecca in the last few hours of her life, how other family members could be connected to all of this, I want to welcome on criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, Safa Robinson-Ferrer. Safa, it's really good to see you. Thanks for taking the time. This is a huge development. This is a big development. The week has changed, okay? A lot has changed. What do you take away from those charges, the very specific charges that they're facing about what may have happened to Rebecca Park?
The charges that these individuals face are very gruesome in nature. And I think what we've come to find out, at least thus far, without the discovery process proceeding as of yet, is that these individuals are alleged to have plotted and schemed in order to lure this woman to their home for the purposes of removing that child from her body. And so very gruesome, very disheartening. And ultimately, those actions led to the death of that woman and that child. And so there are a lot of moving parts to this case, specifically because you have this woman's mother, biological mother, and stepfather, which is an odd faction in and of itself to do that to your child, despite whether or not she was put into foster care system or not. But that, and then there are other family members that also may have some involvement, particularly her sister. And so very sad case, very difficult case. And the facts here are pretty gruesome, to have to put forward, to grand jury and to prosecute and all of those sorts of things. So it's going to be interesting to see what the outcomes ultimately are here.
But essentially, she was killed while pregnant. She was killed while pregnant, right? And this is something that we suspected because there wasn't a lot of information about her body being found, the details of the body. And when that happens, you wonder what that scene might have looked like for a woman who was almost 40 weeks pregnant. I do think it's interesting they're charging them with felony and first-degree murder, right? Why do both?
So one of the things that the prosecution is going to always do is they're going to overcharge and they're going to throw essentially the kitchen sink at these defendants with respect to their alleged conduct. Not only based on the information that we have, not only did they bring her to this location or have her come to this location, my guess, and as the facts sort of roll out throughout this prosecution, are going to be, in my opinion, that they had her there and that they probably tried to remove the fetus while she was alive, while she was awake. And that's where that torture aspect comes from. So they're going to charge these individuals with the murder, certainly because she's unfortunately no longer here. The torture aspect as well, because to do this or to try to extricate this unborn child while this woman is alive, much less, and ultimately causing the death of that child as well. And the other elements or the other offenses that they're ultimately going to be charged with. So the prosecution's always going to put forth as much as they can, especially a case of this nature where you have the murder of a woman and an unborn child. It's very sad, something that the government's going to want to send a message on.
And to be clear, when they're saying premeditated murder, right, when they're saying conspiracy to commit torture, conspiracy to commit this assault, the intention to cause miscarriage or stillbirth, how are they going to prove that? How are they going to prove there was this criminal agreement, this criminal understanding to do this plan, this intent? Are there text messages? Is it just the state of the body that Rebecca was in? And by the way, we don't have more details about where the baby is. They're saying the baby's dead. We don't know more about the remains. But how are they going to prove what is the intent here? What was the planning here? What was the agreement?
Absolutely. So with a conspiracy charge, you have to have two or more individuals that conspire to ultimately commit an act. So there's going to be some sort of evidence, or at least has been some sort of evidence that would establish that Mr. and Mrs. Bartholomew ultimately created this plan. Did they create this plan with more individuals? And you may see that via text message or text messages amongst themselves, or maybe some sort of social media diary or note diary. There's something there that the government has that's going to show that they had a pretextual plan to get this woman there. Not only that, but the fact that this young woman actually came to the home. That's going to satisfy yet another element or portion of this where she was ultimately lured to that location. And while at that location, there's evidence that they in fact did torture her and that resulted in her death. So again, my guess is going to be that they tried to remove this unborn child from her body for whatever purpose or motive they had to even do that, which is sickening in and of itself, and ultimately caused the death of this woman. And then I think there's information of that her body was removed from that home and ultimately located in another area. So now we're also talking about concealment of a corpse, possible evidence tampering. And I know that there are some other family members that are charged here. So it's going to be interesting to see if they are charged in connection with that evidence tampering or concealment or anything of that nature, or if they were there.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that as well. And by the way, going to planning, do they have records of them making purchases in anticipation of this? So not just the messages, things like that. It is interesting, as disturbing as it is from a legal point of view. You wonder how the prosecution is going to build this case and what they believe happened here. It's just difficult to fathom what this woman went through if these allegations are true. So now I want to move a little bit further to this. So the court explained that Brad is also being charged as a habitual offender. So apparently facing his fourth offense. This means he has at least 3 completed or attempted felonies on his record already. In fact, as the judge considered bond for Brad during his Tuesday arraignment, It took them more than a full minute and a half to list all of the defendant's prior convictions and citations, which include everything from forgery and driving without a license to attempted larceny, receiving stolen property. This is obviously a very different set of crimes that he's facing right now. The public defender who's representing Brad, who appeared virtually, said that he'd represented the defendant before, that he'd always complied with his bond conditions. The attorney also emphasized that Brad had never faced accusations as brutal as these in this case. Now, Safa, how does the court weigh that, right? On one hand, you look at the prior record, all of this, then you hear the attorney say, well, wait a minute. He's never been charged with something like this before. He's innocent until proven guilty. He's always complied in the past. Should he be granted pre-trial release? How does a judge weigh those two things?
And the judge is going to weigh a couple of things. They're going to weigh whether or not this individual is a threat to the community, so the wellness and the safety of the community. And if this individual were to go back out into the community, would they reoffend? Would community members be in danger? But more importantly, bail, the particular purpose of bail is to ensure a defendant's return to court. Does this individual have any prior failures to appear? If this person has come to court, regardless of any prior charges that they've had, if this person has come to court and there's no reason to think that they are a risk of flight, then the judge is going to be more open to giving that individual some sort of lower bail or ultimately release on their recognizance. Now, that wasn't the case for this individual here. Based on this person's criminal history, and again, the resuscitation of his history ultimately caused the judge to keep this individual in custody on a bail. Not only that, but because of this individual's criminal history, there is a good chance that this individual would possibly receive an elevated sentence based on his prior criminal history. Because he has such a significant history, because he's at least a predicate or a persistent offender, possible violent offender, based on whatever is in his history, that could certainly elevate the sentencing guidelines that he would ultimately face if convicted at a trial.
And let me just highlight something else, the brutality. The brutality was laid bare by the prosecutor here, Johanna Kaye. Take a look.
In this case, we have two individuals that created a plan. They conducted research. They brought Rebecca Park to their home. They forced her into a vehicle and took her into the woods where they stabbed her, forced her to lie on the ground while they cut her baby out of her, ultimately causing her death and the death of the baby. This is as heinous and as awful a case as it could be. And I don't believe there are any circumstances in which Mr. Bartholomew should be granted any bond.
By the way, I should say this too. So details about what allegedly happened to Rebecca, that hadn't been made public prior to this point. And you could see the loved ones in the gallery reacting to this horrifying news. And while the prosecutor said that Rebecca's baby was dead, there were no other details that were provided about where the baby's remains might be. I keep emphasizing that, but it's an important note to make. Now, Judge Corey Wiggins denied bond for Brad, explained that he and Cortney are going to be next in court for a probable cause hearing. But it was Cortney's turn, okay? The same public defender tried again to offer up mitigating circumstances for why his client should be granted pre-trial release. Take a look.
She does have friends and family, support structure in the area. She also has a variety of disabilities that I won't go into too much detail just for respect of her. But she does have upcoming medical appointments, MRIs, CAT scans, things of that nature, just so the court is aware.
Once again, though, the judge ruled the danger of Cortney trying to flee outweighed everything else, and she was denied bail. Now, in a press release, the prosecutor said this case involves a truly horrific homicide in which a young woman and her unborn child endured unimaginable suffering at the hands of the defendants. The brutality and disregard for human life displayed here are deeply troubling. While these remain allegations until proven in court, the evidence reflects an extraordinary level of callousness and violence. We look forward to presenting the full facts in court. Now, let me go to this. When Rebecca was reported missing, according to 9 and 10 News, Cortney Bartholomew claimed that she'd been running errands with her earlier in the day and then allegedly saw her get into a black vehicle with an unknown driver. Rebecca's cell phone was later found along the dirt road where Cortney's home is. Once the sheriff's office knew she was missing, they started doing searches on foot. They brought in K-9 teams, a drone. This is all according to news outlet Michigan Live. There were also apparently volunteer search groups not affiliated with law enforcement that were out searching for Rebecca. And 9 and 10 News reports that it was Rebecca's father who found her body in Manistee National Forest on November 25th. And at first, law enforcement would only say the body resembled Rebecca, later confirmed it was her after an autopsy. Now, Safa, again, it goes to the idea of this brutal crime scene, why they might not have wanted to share details. But this is a pretty quick investigation and quick arrest.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately what information was gleaned from the investigation pretty much narrowed law enforcement in on these individuals, the Bartholomews, being the perpetrators of this alleged crime. And I think that was pretty easy for them to put together once they had enough information. Again, we've got that cell phone that was recovered. What information came off of that cell phone that would have provided them some additional information? We have the statements from Cortney Bartholomew that indicated that they had been together earlier that day and law enforcement's discussion with her. So based on that discussion, what was credible that she said, what was not credible based on what she said. Again, we have these continuous searches and search parties. We also know that there was a search warrant that was executed on another property. So we also don't know specifically yet, but my guess is going to be that whatever may have been recovered at that property was also evidence that showed or furthered the investigation, pointing to the Bartholomews as the perpetrator and any other family member that may have also been arrested as a result of that, particularly her sister.
Let me talk about that for a second. So just hours after the searchers found Rebecca's body, authorities announced 2 arrests. This was Park's 43-year-old fiance, Richard Lee Fowler, and her sister, Kimberly Park. They were in custody. They were arraigned on December 2nd. Now, the live stream of that hearing was cut off by the judge, who said he wanted to protect the rights of the defendants to a fair trial. But Fowler was arraigned on 2 counts of delivery, manufacture of a controlled substance, and for being a habitual offender. His bond was set at $1 million. Kimberly was arraigned on charges of tampering with evidence, lying to police, and a false report of a felony. Her bond was set at $750,000, still a high amount. The Detroit Free Press got their hands on a felony complaint that was filed in Cadillac District Court, which claims that Kimberly lied to authorities, telling them Cortney and Brad hit Rebecca in the head, which allegedly caused a seizure before they took her body away. Safa, what do you make of this? What do you make of the apparent connection here between with this fiance and sister?
So with respect to the fiance, it's going to be interesting here because what he's been charged with isn't necessarily anything that's specifically related to the crime or the murder of this young woman. So with respect to the sister here, she's got a number of charges that include tampering with evidence, lying to law enforcement and things of that nature, and filing a false report. So it's going to be interesting to see what the actual role was and to what extent was she involved. Notably here, she's not charged with conspiracy like the other 2, like the Bartholomews. So she does give testimony or evidence or, her statement to law enforcement, and that indicates that her sister was struck by Ms. Bartholomew. Whether or not that's true, that could be something that, based on the evidence and how the body was located, could be materially false. So that could be the basis for that filing a false statement. That's very possible here. We've also got that tampering charge where, again, if she was at that scene and ultimately helped to dispose of the body or dispose of any piece of evidence, that is where that charge would essentially come from. But she's got a charge there for lying to law enforcement and filing a false report. So there's something about that conversation that ultimately led law enforcement to believe that she was being untruthful. Whether or not that's to benefit her own self or to benefit the Bartholomews is going to be a question at this point.
Whenever I see this, it does make me wonder, who's involved, who has information, and are they going to plead guilty and take some sort of deal to testify against the others? But I think it might be difficult at this point to know if prosecutors would accept that and who has information about who and what a deal might even look like.
Absolutely. And I think we can pretty much bet that the sister is going to ultimately probably testify against the Bartholomews. We can pretty much expect that whether she's going to receive a significant benefit is going to remain a question, but it's oftentimes in the prosecution's best interest for the strength of their case to begin flipping individuals or defendants against one another. And I think that the sister is going to be the easiest person to flip against the Bartholomews. Also, whether or not Cortney Bartholomew is going to flip against her husband or vice versa in terms of pointing the finger at one another for who actually was the one that committed the act that resulted in her death, or the petting or the individual acts that resulted in her death. There's also going to be a question of if one of them can argue they were under duress or they were being threatened or coerced to participate in this type of event. And so all of those things are going to factor in as this case continues to progress and you start to see defenses on the defendant's behalf.
And let me also mention something else. There's another disturbing revelation. So we now know that both Richard Lee Fowler and Brad Bartholomew are convicted sex offenders. In fact, Michigan court records show that in 2023, Brad was arrested for failing to register and report in with law enforcement. He was sentenced in 2024 to 100 days in jail. We were able to locate both men on Michigan's sex offender registry. And according to the site, Fowler has sex crime convictions dating back to 2003, with at least one of them being directly connected to children. And Bartholomew's convictions involve possession of child sexual abuse material, criminal sexual conduct. Safa, real quick, is any of that going to play into the case?
Generally speaking, it's not, but if the prosecution can get it in, they will. So oftentimes prior criminal convictions or prior bad acts are not allowed in a case to show that the defendant acted with propensity or in coordination with those prior charges. So the court wants to essentially prevent information coming in that indicates, well, they were a criminal before, they did these things before, they must have done what they're alleged to have done in this particular case. And the court has to make a fine line determination as to what information may ultimately come in. There are certain exceptions to that rule, but generally speaking and overall, the sexual abuse or sexual assault allegations that were previously there, there's no basis for them to come in unless the prosecution makes an application. And there's a very fine line when those things can come in. And it's usually to ultimately weave in the narrative of what the prosecution's theory is. And I don't think that that's going to be the case here, especially considering how long ago those convictions were obtained.
Right. Now, Rebecca's story, by the way, I should say this, has led to rampant speculation online about the family dynamics behind the scenes, according to multiple social media posts by true crime content creators following the case. Fowler, Rebecca's apparent fiancé, the father of her child, had previously dated Cortney, so Rebecca's biological mom. There has also been rumors on social media that there was a burn barrel with flames shooting up that was spotted on the Bartholomew property around the time Rebecca went missing. Some have speculated whether the baby's remains may have been disposed of in that barrel. To be clear, though, authorities have not confirmed this information. But you do wonder what could be the motive for Cortney and Brad allegedly doing this, right? Choosing to hurt Rebecca. Brad's sister, Stacey Davis, told the Detroit Free Press that the couple wanted a baby but couldn't conceive one. Now, you wonder, is that the possibility? We don't know. I will tell you, as this case progresses, we were probably going to get more information. Rebecca's adoptive mother, Stephanie Park, spoke to 9 and 10 News saying, "We've been silent because we do care. We wanted her found. We did not want to push anybody that would be involved in this way so that she would be able to be found. I never suspected her as running away with the baby, so we've been preparing ourselves for this outcome. She had some mental illnesses and some troubles. She was a loving person, but she had her problems. She deserves to be remembered as the sweet girl that she was when she was younger." By the way, 9 and 10 News reports that Rebecca's 2 other sons, ages 3.5 and 2, they're in Stephanie's care, as is Kimberly's 1-year-old daughter. According to reporting from Cadillac News, there are probable cause conferences for both defendants that are scheduled for December 9th, preliminary examinations scheduled for December 16th, so we'll keep an eye out for that. Safa Robinson-Ferrer, thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.